Everyone says a man survives the West by keeping his head down, but we know the truth. This land only respects those who dare to stand tall. Today is the story of Orin Halver, where a wound became a compass and fear slowly turned into backbone. Out here beneath the wide western sky, everything began with one small choice. A stranger cutting a rope he was never meant to touch. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The desert breeze began to rise just as Orin Halver guided his worn-out horse toward the crooked gate. Grit and sand whipped across his cheeks, sharp as needles carrying the bitter odor of dried blood, splintered timber, and old hemp. Ahead of the cabin, two Apache women, Tamsin and Apache, hung suspended, their bodies stretched cruelly between weathered posts. The ropes had bitten deep into their wrists, forcing their arms outward past the line of their shoulders. Their legs were bound apart, leaving every ounce of their weight to grind against the cords, now dark and swollen from strain. Their lean, sun-toughened frames shook in small, uneven tremors, not from the cooling evening, but from pain that refused to grant them the mercy of unconsciousness. Faint lash marks crossed their dust-streaked skin, dull red beneath the grime. Their heads sagged forward, not in surrender, only because their necks had no strength left to hold them upright. Each gust set the ropes creaking, and their bodies jerked in reply, pulling the agony tighter. Orin stood rooted in the dirt. He could hear his own heart thudding slow and heavy, louder than the wind itself. This was no quick killing. It was a slow invitation for suffering to finish the job. He scanned the yard. Nothing. No riders, no voices, just the silent cabin at his back, and two human beings left to fade on the very soil he had gambled his future on. If he rode away, they would be dead by morning. If he freed them, he would be stepping straight into a war that wasn't his. Orin Halver drew the old skinning knife from his belt. The blade caught the last thin light, cold certain. He moved to the nearest post, aware that the instant he cut those ropes, this land would claim him for good. Two firm strokes severed the first line. The body dropped hard. He lunged forward and caught her against his shoulder. She was stiff and chilled, her weight soaked into his shirt with the smell of sweat and dust and old wounds. She made no sound, only breathed shallow and broken. He sliced the second rope. A pony slid down more slowly, as though the cords had drained the final spark from her. Orin lowered them both to the ground, kneeling in the dirt, while he worked the knots free from wrists bruised nearly black. He had done this for tangled cattle, never for people. But these were people. Two living souls. The first woman lay still. Orin pressed his ear to her chest and found a thin, stumbling heartbeat. She was alive. The other opened her eyes, deep, unblinking black, clear and fierce. There was no pleading there, no blame, only cold reckoning, the gaze of a warrior knocked down, but far from beaten. He carried them inside. The door shut behind him with a hollow click that sounded too loud in the empty room. The cabin smelled of damp boards and neglect. He laid them on the floor, tore a strip from his undershirt, and soaked their wrists with water to coax the blood back. His hands were rough-scarred from years of fence wire and cattle rope from a life that had never been gentle. No savings to speak of, no kin waiting anywhere, no choices worth the name. This patch of dirt and this sagging cabin were everything he owned, bought with every coin he'd sweated for every winter he'd gone hungry to survive. It was a late start for a man who had lived too long on the edge. Every cold season he had known the taste of an empty belly. Day after day, he had clenched his teeth and labored just to keep this place in his hands, a late start for a man who had spent his life balanced on thin ice. The woman who was awake shifted slightly. Her split lips trembled. Orin Halver bent closer. "They will return," Tamsin whispered, her voice brittle, as wind scraping across dry prairie grass. For this house. He straightened and let his eyes travel over the 4 plank walls, the knife scars and the floorboards, a single board lying just a touch uneven. The cabin had not been forgotten by chance. Someone had meant to leave it exactly this way. Orin lowered himself into the lone chair, elbows braced on his knees. 2 trails formed in his mind, as plain as wagon ruts in the desert. One trail led away, he could ride out, keep his skin and the little he owned. The other meant staying and paying whatever price came due. A map. Not of fields or fence lines, but of veins thin, confident strokes showing depth direction of digging and the rough mark for silver. Beside it lay a slim notebook filled with hurried figures, measurements, failed samples, and a name written on the first page, Obadiah Kearns. Orin swallowed. He had heard that name whispered in town, the man who had owned this ground before him. Behind him, Tamsin stirred. She was fully awake now. Her eyes rested on the map, not with wonder, but with quiet grief. They have known about the mine, she said, for many seasons. Orin turned. Then why sell? Because they are patient, Tamsin answered. They let fear finish what they begin. She spoke in short, dry sentences. The land had been sold cheap on purpose to men with no family and no voice, men whose vanishing would trouble no one. Then came the hanging posts, not to kill outright, but to convince any passerby that death lived on this soil. The last owner did not flee, she said. He dug. He wrote everything down. And he spoke too freely. You can guess the rest. Orin looked again at the notebook. The final pages were ripped dark with old stains. He needed no further explanation. A cold shiver crept through him. In a single breath, the whole picture sharpened the wary glances in town, the bargain price that had seemed like luck. He had not bought a poor man's dream. He had been chosen for a poor man's grave. The quiet that followed his words about staying had told him everything. He had not stumbled onto the wrong patch of earth. He had been marked for it. From beyond the fence came a small, careful sound, the dull ring of hooves finding hard soil. No greetings, no voices, only a presence set there on purpose. Orin Halver folded the map and tucked it inside his shirt. He rose, feeling the weight settle across his shoulders. The snare had been laid long before he ever rode in, and now that he saw it plain, the fear no longer lived in his chest. It waited in the men about to cross his line. The horses halted just outside the rails. No hurry, no doubt, only bodies placed exactly where they intended to be. Orin stood without moving. The cabin timbers whispered under the lamp, as if the old house knew it was being watched. A man's voice drifted out of the dark, smooth and easy. No need to keep that gun aimed, Halver. Orin tightened his fingers around the battered rifle. Tamsin leaned against the wall, breathing steadier now, her eyes still keen as honed steel. A pony lay silent on the floor, her chest lifting in faint, fragile waves. We only want a word, the voice went on. Short and civil. A shape stepped forward and paused where the lamplight leaked through the doorway crack. Malric Fenner, long duster coat hat pulled low to hide half his face. Behind him, others spread out slow and patient like dogs waiting for a nod. Orin eased the door open a hand's width enough for the 2 men to measure one another. Fenner looked past him into the cabin, his eyes moving as if counting cattle. Then he smiled, not with warmth, only the grin of a man sure the game was already won. You paid honest for the land, Fenner said. Nobody denies that. He edged closer and stopped on the threshold. But there's something here that never was yours? No outright threat yet. Orin felt the ring tightening, not with bullets, but with the cold confidence of men who had broken others before. Fenner tilted his head toward Tamsin. Hand them over. Do that you keep breathing. Ride off and forget this place ever crossed your path. Silence settled thick as dust in August. Orin heard his own breath rasp. He pictured the dirt track back to town, remembered the men who had taken it before him, remembered what it meant to live by turning your back. Tamsin shook her head, once a tiny motion that said more than any speech. Orin shut the door. The latch fell with a dry final click. Outside, no shouting followed, only a stretch of waiting. As if Fenner were weighing something he already knew. All right, the voice came again, quiet as before. A stir beyond the fence. Orin couldn't see it, but he felt it boots fanning out places taken talk finished. He looked to Tamsin. Their eyes met, nothing needed saying. Orin laid the rifle on the table and took up the knife instead. He stepped into the space where any man breaking through would meet him first. Outside, iron brushed wood. The still ring had closed. What was coming next had no use for words. Splinters burst inward, and a man tore through the doorway, carrying the stink of cheap rye and trail dust. No yelling, only rough breath and the quick, sure motions of someone long used to this kind of work. Orin Halver slashed out with the knife. The edge ripped through the stranger's coat sleeve, shredding cloth, but missing flesh. The answer came at once. A rifle butt crashed into Orin's shoulder, solid and exact. The room lurched sideways. He slammed across the table, ribs taking the full blow. Breath knocked clean out of him. Tamsin lunged from the corner, no cry in her throat, only motion. She hurled herself into another man and drove him against the wall. Yet there were too many hands. An arm snaked around her neck and dragged her backward. Tamsin hammered an elbow into the man's ribs, struck true but had no chance for a second blow. A length of rope hissed through the air, caught her wrist and jerked hard. She stumbled and went down. Orin fought to rise. A savage kick folded him over. The rifle on the table was booted aside, sliding beneath the bed. He reached for it, and a heel stamped on his wrist, so heavy he felt the bone groan. He clamped his jaw and kept his voice buried. The oil lamp toppled. Flame raced across the thirsty boards, smoke clawing at the air, hot and bitter. Orin watched the fire creep toward the roof corner where the timbers were already soft with rot. The crackle sounded like a clock counting the last minutes. Tamsin was hauled upright, hands bound behind her. Through the haze she searched for Orin. No panic in her eyes, only one level, unbroken look. "We are losing," she breathed. Malric Fenner stepped in calm, as a preacher in the middle of bedlam. He glanced at the burning walls and then at Orin, pinned to the floor. "You see," Fenner said, voice flat and easy, "every landowner meets this hour sooner or later." Orin tried to lift his head. Smoke seared his eyes. He thought of the rutted road beyond the yard. Thought of letting go, yet his body would not obey. The blaze climbed faster. The smoke thickened to a choking curtain. The men who had burst in began to draw back, leaving Orin and Tamsin held in the heart of their own home. Fenner turned away. He was certain the matter was finished. And in that moment, with the cabin roaring behind him and nothing left in Orin's hands, the weight of fear shifted shoulders. From far off came a low, steady drumming like the pulse of the desert waking after a long sleep. At first, it was faint, nearly lost under the fire's roar and the scuff of retreating boots. Then it grew one beat, two, then many. The men gripping Tamsin hesitated. One glanced toward the door. Another followed, and without a word, the confidence in the room began to crack. Beyond the fence, a wall of dust lifted thick and rolling close to the earth, like a hard wind crawling over the flats. Out of that cloud, shapes formed, first scattered, then countless. The horses did not run. They came forward steady and sure, every hoof striking the ground like a hammer on an anvil. Malric Fenner halted and turned, squinting into the distance. At the front rode Chaitin. His presence alone altered the air. Behind him moved Chaitin's band, spread in a line known to men who had survived generations, not wild, not loud. Only the quiet order of those who understood war. Pull back, one of the men from Fenner Company muttered under his breath. The collision that followed was swift and sure. No wild yelling, only clean motion, each strike delivered with intent. Those who had strutted bold in the shadows now faltered in the red glare and swirling grit. One dropped, then another. The rest broke and ran, not from the thought of dying, but from the sudden knowledge they had stepped into a fight that did not belong to them. The cords around Tamsin were sliced away. She rose straight, her shoulders quivering, yet her eyes never wavered. Orin Halver was hauled from the floor, coughing hard lungs thick with smoke, his legs hardly able to carry him. Chaitin swung down from his horse and crossed to Orin, meeting his gaze without judgment, without measure, only a quiet understanding of the choice the man had made. Malric Fenner was driven to the dirt before his hand could find a weapon. They bound him and left him kneeling in the dust. The swagger he once wore faded like a flame snuffed by wind. Men worked to beat down the fire, and the cabin's blaze began to shrink. The breeze shifted. The smoke thinned. Orin stood amid ash and hoof tracks. He had not conquered this fight. He had only stayed upright long enough for the fight to find its proper owner. And for the first time since he rode onto this ground, the desert no longer kept silent in the face of wrong. As the rider's thunder ebbed, the land settled back into its own steady breathing. Gray flakes drifted from the scorched roof. The smell of burnt wood clung to the air, dry and sharp. Orin leaned against a charred post chest, heaving hands shaking more from weariness than fear. Chaitin lifted a hand. No words were needed. Two men from Chaitin's band stepped forward and dragged Malric Fenner into the open space before the cabin. He knelt with wrists tied, his hat lying in the dirt. The edge in his eyes had dulled, replaced by a late cautious regret. "Bring them here," Chaitin said, voice low and even. Before long, two riders from town appeared, Silco Baird and Jarrett Sloan. No parade, no escort, only familiar faces stripped of their borrowed authority. They saw Fenner on his knees. They saw the toppled posts that had once held the hanging ropes. And they saw Orin still standing where they had expected any man to flee. Orin lifted the floor plank warm from the dying heat and drew out the notebook and map. He did not raise them high. He spoke no speech. He simply set them on the ground where the firelight touched the lines and scribbled figures the marks of a silver vein. The depth notes, the hurried scrawl, Silco Baird glanced at them. Jarrett Sloan swallowed. Neither offered the first lie. Chaitin fixed his eyes on them. "You traded fear for time," he said. "You strung the living to make the land fall silent." No one argued, no witnesses were needed. The pattern stood plain, the cheap sails, the gallows, the rumors all fitting together like wagon tracks, pressed into damp earth. "Take them," Chaitin said. Silco Baird edged back. Jarrett Sloan looked for an opening. There was none. Two warriors moved in, quick and steady. No needless force, wrists were bound, pistols taken away. Power slid from their shoulders like dust shaken from a coat. Malric Fenner bowed his head. He did not plead. He knew the meaning of that instant, the law of a moment when truth opens its hands before those who refuse to step aside. Chaitin raised his arm one last time. The last standing posts were dragged down. The ropes were severed and tossed into the flames. No speeches, no triumph. Only an ending set exactly where it had long been waiting. Orin Halver studied the cabin scarred along its edges, yet refusing to fall. He did not taste victory. He saw a boundary freshly marked. Justice out here never arrives with trumpets. It comes when there is no shadow left to hide in. And this night, it had found its door. Morning crept in slow, as though the desert needed a long breath after such wait. The first light slid over warm drifts of ash, outlining the wounded cabin, burned but unbroken. Part of the roof had vanished. The boards were black, yet the bones of the place held firm, quiet, and stubborn. Orin settled on the front step, a coarse bandage cinched around his ribs. Each breath still bit at him, but the smoke had finally left his chest. Only the scent of damp soil remained after the wind had turned. He looked across the ground where the posts had stood. The cords were gone. All that lingered were faint dents in the packed earth, like memories not ready to fade. Tamsin rested by the fence shoulders, loose palms open to the breeze. She gazed toward the horizon, where Chaitin's band had ridden away without a sound, leaving a different kind of order behind. One that asked for no oaths. A pony was awake now, leaning against the wall and sipping water in slow, careful swallows. The cloud had lifted from her eyes. No one spoke. The night had already said its fill. A handful of Rattlespur's settlers drifted in as the sun climbed. They studied the cabin. They studied Orin. Then they looked at the stretch of land they had once turned from. Some gave a quiet nod. Others dropped their gaze, but not one carried a sneer. Orin pushed himself upright. He had not woken rich. No silver vein lay exposed. No miracle waited in his yard, only ground no longer ruled by dread. He lifted a charred plank and set it aside. Then another. That was how the labor began, small, stubborn, honest. Thompson stepped near and placed an old hammer in his hand. No words passed. He took it. They stood together before the house that was theirs, scarred, imperfect, yet theirs. For the first time, the soil did not murmur for a man to flee. The day cooled as the breeze returned. Orin drove a fresh post into the earth, not for hanging, only to keep the fence true. When the last strike rang out, the note was clear and bright. He paused the hammer resting in his grip, then let it fall gently. Some places never call our names. And some places we answer anyway, not because the road is gentle, but because it is right. The cabin remained under the wide, open sky. No longer a snare built from terror. Only a home, and for Orin Halver, that was enough. Out on the frontier, a man learns early that peace and strength are hard-won things, and that happiness rarely comes riding on its own. The old country teaches another lesson as well. Fear never grows wild by accident. It is planted careful like seed in the right season and the right soil. Those who wish to rule others know this truth. They water fear in the hearts of people already scared of losing the little they own. Orin Halver was never a hero out of storybooks. He was not tougher than the next man. He did not carry a finer rifle. He held no grand design in his pocket. He was only a fellow who spent his years scraping for a patch of ground and then found himself standing where every man must stand, sooner or later, between the easy road of turning away and the hard road of paying the price to remain. In the real world, wicked men seldom announce their purpose. They sow dread instead. They whisper that the trouble belongs to someone else. They tell a man he is not strong enough, that another will set things right. Step by step, folks retreat until wrong feels ordinary. Orin did not prevail because his arm was mighty. He prevailed because he refused to bend when others expected him to tremble. There are matters in a lifetime not worth risking a single breath for. Yet there are others that if a man walks away, will haunt his sleep until the grave asks his name. Honor does not make a man famous. Honor lets him close his eyes at night when no witness stands nearby. A man need not hunt for trouble. But when trouble finds him, and he knows the just course, the question is no longer victory or defeat. It narrows to one plain thought. Can I keep breathing and still respect the face that meets me in the mirror? Now and then, all it takes is one stubborn soul holding his ground, and the world around him shifts like the course of a river. The desert remembers such choices longer than it remembers storms. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours, thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal, barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals narration and script development, the emotional tone editing and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.